Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another SixyTimes Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. Today we are, as always, playing Dead or Alive 6 and specifically seeking new ways to get our internal training done. There's been a lot more shifts recently in terms of what's available to us from other games and therefore what we ended up thinking about, as well as a recent enough set of tournaments where we were able to see what certain forms of high-level play of the game looked like. It takes quite a while to build up all the information because when a game is not that popular, you can obviously just watch what's online, especially if you're on PlayStation, but for the most part, you can't necessarily tell whether or not the players you're watching are fighting at the quote-unquote highest level, or taking advantage of something their opponent doesn't know how to stop. With that in mind, therefore, we're taking the bits we have learned from those interactions, the bits we have learned from watching things, and seeing which applications really matter here. We got some zoning, some specific block strings, some concepts of how to play neutral that we basically already understood mostly. And unfortunately, very little matchup knowledge, at least other than Ionic, who got some. One of the main things that people at higher levels do better than we do in general is avoid situations where whiff punishes are an option by, interestingly, moving to the space where they expect to need to block. This is probably simply because they have a better understanding of enough of the moves in the game to make sure that when they do have to deal with someone blocking them, they know exactly where to counterattack, whereas we're a little less experienced with this. Spending more time on this, though, isn't necessarily going to give us a big payoff, because, as with all games, opponents know better how to deal with their own situations than you do. They'll set it up so that you thought you could block, but can't. Similarly, they'll use a lot of moves where you think that they will be hit back, but not. And of course, you see a lot more of that, where your opponent doesn't know whether or not you intend to continue your combo or not. But this is a common thing that's happened in DOA many times over many years. It's one of the last things you learn for any given character, but it's also, of course, one of the most important ones. What moves do you have that your opponent will probably let you get away with? And this is why we always say it is so important to know whether or not you are supposed to try to throw in a situation as a punish, because you just need the speed. Mistimed, but still worked. even in close range situations, understanding whether or not to go for a quick attack or a throw is very important. But unlike many other games where there's something your opponent is likely to do on wake up that's super unsafe and therefore a big problem, this game doesn't have so much of that. Meaning that you either want to spend time feeling you should go in outright and having a plan for that, or you want to get out of the way and get back to your own optimal position. This is even more true when these two start to face off, because this is effectively a grappler match, just as we've often seen in matchups between my countery defensive characters and anything that my opponent plays. While the strikes are very important and the neutral is very important, both sides are trying to find the spacing to grab the other. And all of those normals are mostly just eventually trying to prevent that from happening, more so than, my plan to get damage off of this kick combo. So, being able to dodge other people's throw timings and understand how to get around them ends up being just as important. The trickier the throw, the more important it is. But that also means that you end up in that position, as mentioned before. You want to throw your opponent, but you don't always want to be right next to them when they wake up, unless you're pretty confident that the next thing you do is going to be victorious in some way. Sometimes it's just throw again. But given that that has problems, you don't necessarily want to push on it all that hard. Making defense in this matchup kind of hard in lots of ways, for both sides. I think this isn't actually the way this is quote-unquote supposed to be played, but this is the way we tend to play characters in general, and the expectation. Not to mention the fact that the throw range is just so good on both these characters relative to what the other is doing, that it's just better to go for it than not. But you do have to be careful about the mistiming of throws similarly. And because this game does have a difficulty in that you can't just throw, your opponent must be standing if you go for a standing throw, and crouching if you go for something else. You're going to try to find yourself figuring out which way this has to work. Meaning that a lot of the time, they're still aiming to throw each other, more so as a whiff or as a punish for movement, than specifically because it's throw time, I'm in close, I can do what I want now. Which is why it leads to this situation of neither of us ever wanting to end up blocking. But the same thing still applies. You can end up blocking and interrupt your opponent with a fast enough throw, or just block and make their throw whiff in some way. Understanding exactly all this spacing is, though, is something you have to build up over time, as mentioned before. So it really just comes down to, is it fun? You can't be expected to know beforehand how any given interaction will happen. And in a game like this one, where there's so many potential interactions, this comes up a lot more. To the point where it can be fairly frustrating if you're not thinking particularly hard about it. If you're trying to win instead of watching the interactions that are happening, in this game you'll end up mashing a lot more than you normally would for games of this type, because the pressure strings and the way they work are so easily interrupted by someone who has a really good understanding of when they can throw you. This can be avoided by just playing neutral so hard with a long-range character that the throw situation doesn't come up, which might be what we're about to see. But it's not really avoidable entirely. Because range, while it can prevent you from being with punish thrown quite often, isn't necessarily going to prevent you from having to block. And once you've had to block, your opponent could, for example, set up a situation in which they're aiming to make you block in a way that will get you thrown. A lot of the time that is my goal here. Baymon's actual methods of doing damage to her aren't so great once I'm playing with that mindset. So I could almost be said to be playing defensively at this point. As long as I don't drop too many combos or setups, my opponent will have trouble doing enough damage to be a real problem. Unless I, similarly, end up in a situation where I should be doing something other than blocking, but I am blocking. Baymon has a lot of very punishable moves to be doing at those long ranges, and they don't necessarily pay off all that much in the matchup. Misspacings are often a big payoff for Nico either way, so getting to just go, okay, I did enough damage, I can stop now, pays off pretty heavily. Even that, for example, was more or less a bait. I think I can win this match with the situation as it is now, but might have been in more trouble if I had to deal with break blows. Although on the other hand, I did seem to have sacrificed something for that, namely my shades. Perfectly timed counterattack though, as I thought I had convinced my opponent to block long enough to get thrown, but picked the correct moment. And crouching under that was just as good. But opponent switching mindset now to needing to keep her out to prevent all of the crazy Nico things she likes to do means that zoning is back on the table at least a little bit. The result is that you can push around an opponent who is trying to do this to you. While still maintaining the goal of throwing them, you can just get around all of the standard flows. And that was one of the things that came up the most from watching matches. The top players spent a lot more time trying to negate a specific counter to their style, meaning that this rewards the same sort of skills that we often talk about in other games. Those games don't reward those skills as much, we just happen to like using them. And you have to work a lot harder to get the better results. Whereas for DOA, it seems to be the sort of thing where it just kind of comes naturally, or at least it would with sufficient practice. And here, while I will not have a lot to say, you're going to see a lot of the same. In order for Honoka to prevent Tina from doing most of her game plan, she has to attempt a certain subset of kicks. Meaning that if Tina ever feels, I'm not going to make it into range to do what I want, she can just do forward hold and hope she doesn't get terribly punished for it. Most of the time, Honoka can't punish her for doing it. So it's pretty simple. She wants to get in and throw, but If she feels, no, that's not going to work, I'm going to get caught, I'm going to get tricked in some way, then forward hold and just hope for the best, because you're not going to get hurt too much for doing it. Your opponent has to do what you just saw, a massive commitment to something that is generally not a great idea, and land it as a whiff punish, because if you don't land it as a whiff punish, it doesn't work in the first place. The main problem, of course, is that when they get closer together, a lot of Tina's advantage actually goes away, whereas most of the time she wants this to happen, she doesn't have as many good ways to get out of the same situations. Still, they're both relatively explosive characters, and understanding that she can do this means that after a while, they'll work it out. But that's where we got back to from the beginning. Knowing that you have to do this in this way doesn't come up unless you start to think about how to get around the thing stopping you from doing what you actually want to do. And of course, learn to ignore the little bits of damage that happen when your opponent chose to use a different method to stop you. Because even if you've been held, even if you've messed up something somewhere, that's part of the game. You're not really trying to resolve the problem. Getting clipped by a low on your shin isn't a sign that you did something wrong. It's a sign that you didn't have enough health to get tanked through multiple kicks to the shin. You know, I literally don't remember how to get to this section of the stage. Do remember that if you do join up with us, you probably may get pushed to top. And this game has a bunch of weird auto-confirm stuff, which might mean that you might not end up playing the match you expect. I suspect that's what's just happened. But that's just what happens if we both do it at the same time. It's entirely common, obviously, for people to join lounges and then expect that they have to wait a while to go do something else. But especially for our LA lounges, this is not the default for us, so. Unfortunately, this means that technically it means that they probably have to spend longer to wait to get their turn, unless they know how to play Kasumi really well. Or are even around to realize that they need to be playing. As a result of that, therefore, I will make no commentary on this, because we don't know what their character they actually play, so even if they can play Kasumi well, it wasn't their intention. A return of the Wi-Fi warrior. Now this is interesting because this player hasn't previously shown much tendency to throw, but they might just be very aware that Kasumi's throw range and Nico's throw range really don't work the same. Part of the reason why you end up stopping your strings and hitting and trying to throw with Nico is because if you continue her strings for long enough, while she does have some tricky ways of being not as punishable, generally she's not plus. You can do something. If anything, your difficulty will be figuring out whether or not to throw high or low. And that, in turn, deals with a lot of the potential threat of the character. She's just not that damaging. You can just block a lot. With the main problem coming that when you don't know whether or not it's time to stop blocking, then she will in fact beat you up. So, to quickly go over what exactly it is you need to do once you have been placed at the end of a Nico block string. You already see our Tina taking attempt to 1, functionally sidestep and punch. This doesn't work for most things actually, but it is a good starter to have because the things it does work on are the most obvious Nico options. The Wi-Fi is probably not helping, but in fact this is quite explainable outright, I think, just from watching this. If you get kicked twice, a third attack is usually coming, and that's why the sidestep doesn't work. Which third attack comes is a little bit harder to understand, so generally you don't really care that much, except to know that once she started kicking you, she has to keep kicking. The only way she won't keep kicking is if you have the opportunity to throw. So like everything else, you can break it down to basically 2 options at the end of an interaction. If you were forced to block and she started kicking, then either you should throw her because you think she's going to stop kicking, or you should try to hold a kick because she's going to keep kicking. Unfortunately, neither of these things can be done with certainty because she's that type of technical character where you can't decide. And I can see just from this that it's probably too laggy to even manage that. But unfortunately, there's very little you can do about someone hopping in on Wi-Fi that is not great, other than ask them to leave, I guess. I don't actually remember how to kick people out of these lounges, but it really doesn't matter that much either. Fortunately for us, we do have the 3-win streak limit, meaning that even if they manage to win, it really doesn't matter. You could obviously just not fight them and see if it will make them leave, but it shouldn't really matter either way. So, rather than deal with that from that front, we see what happens. You want to play the Nico mirror? Obviously, being the one who is much more used to this character, I might have a little better luck, but I'm not expecting much because, again, there is enough lag that being on the defending end of this is not really going to be helpful. But she's relatively good at interrupting things, which makes the mirror match really interesting because can you interrupt another Nico's strings without specifically aiming at them? This is often, I'd say it's more possible than many other characters because she has a lot of situations where she's either going explicitly high or explicitly low. And, of course, there is her 6P plus K, which is basically the best neutral button ever. You can see there as well that you have another option, but it doesn't help. I just dashed out of it because, you can. I don't like doing it though because it doesn't lead to anything useful. I dropped it. I'm not sure why the dash helps, but it doesn't help enough, particularly not if you're playing like Tina and you don't really care in the first place. I misread it. So as you can see, I can get closer, but my opponent is still stuttery and repetitive enough. It's not just, oh, I'm repeating whatever. She is explicitly built as a character who will manage to get through all of this by changing what she does at different times. But I do have some idea how to interrupt my own character to a point. And as noted, if she's just being repetitive, she doesn't do a lot of damage. There you go, that's the reason why the backdash doesn't help. But it does help because it again changes your opponent's options to something you could probably start to read through. But Tina is not so good at crouching, and neither is whoever would be following this, assuming we even got that far. If you have meter, the backdash can help you because you can make her whiff and then do this, but you're then using all your meter. This is also why you notice that when I am playing this character, I don't generally attack in that way, because I know it's backdashable, but the thing you end up doing to get out of it can be really damaging to me. Now we have completely trapped in the I thought it was going to be completely trapped in the corner, but apparently not. And that was won through the application of much science, data science specifically. But more explicitly, it worked because I know the character well enough to know what to do. Without that knowledge, without the knowledge of, okay, maybe this time I should try doing this one. I wonder if they're around. They'll probably notice by the time it happens anyway. Or at least we can hope so. Yeah, they did. This player has stopped by before and is relatively strong in a lot of ways that cover all sorts of ground. The Wi-Fi has mild effects, so you may notice some drop combos from both sides here, but I don't expect it to be overwhelmingly affecting of the match's outcome. From what I remember, we can do the same sort of practice here, but given their choice of character, it's going to be a lot more about something closer to what I mentioned in the Bayman match. There's a lot of figuring out which the longest button he can use is, and seeing whether or not he needs to use it to prevent you from doing your own game plan. Honoka's pushback isn't necessarily all that useful in most matchups, but this is one where it matters. One of the big problems that really tall / long characters that like Raido have is that they don't tend to have the fastest normals, or at least not a very large arsenal of those fast normals. Meaning that when they do get into a pushback situation, their better options are kind of limited, and you can often just block or go for an interrupt strike right after. Another reason to just hit throw from the Rido side, that is. Unfortunately, I don't think his throws are terribly strong, at least not the fast ones. I think he has a really powerful one that you have to do a command for. But in general, this isn't really the sort of match where the thing I was talking about comes out a lot, because our Honoka does understand this. The pushback is enough to create openings, simply because Rido is so long. And while he's quite damaging if you happen to mess up even a little bit, given that even that, confirms into bigger damage. When you are in close, you don't really have to worry as much anymore. You just have to understand what the main things to do are. And since our Honoka's game plan mostly revolves around whiff punishing and flowing in ways that will bring her closer to the opponent, it's not as bad. This position, however, is a big negative, and playing it perfectly from here is therefore a large requirement. There's the throw. Yep. And slightly too slow on that, possibly could have or should have confirmed a little bit faster into it. Yep, there's those drops. I think I've seen enough from the Rido side to believe that it is not really necessarily affecting the outcome of the match, but definitely affecting the flow of it. That's sweet though. That was not a counter hit and therefore not big damage. And that was one of the few situations where going for the meaty against someone with an invincible move plays out just like it does in every other game. A demonstration that this player does specifically do Kasumi things. Ariane is relatively good at this matchup because of a general understanding of Kasumi's ranges. But if you play Kasumi a very erratic way, then it at least raises your chances of moving through Sun's defense moves. Unfortunately, it's really hard to play Kasumi at the level of erratic required for this, and the more our Ayane improves, the less likely that you're going to be able to be erratic enough. Another unfortunate aspect of this is simply the low damage that Kasumi has when she's in her erratic mode. She does build up a lot of meter though, and that can get you fairly far if you know when to use it. Nope, sorry, got the read, so that ended that. But that was lucky, I guess. Not sufficient, but lucky enough to work. And that's partially why. Ayane is a very precise character. In many situations, she does have, like, really big ways to make it clear, okay, I'm covering all of this space, but all of those moves in her case tend to be very telegraphed compared to other characters of the same type. Which is why she often zones better than others. That accuracy means that generally, if you move a little erratically while fighting her, she has to switch to throws, which tend to track better. This isn't really about playing defensively though. If you play Dude defensively, she'll notice and get into the correct position, so you will have to deal with those big sweeping moves. But some randomness will definitely help because it will make her miss. Again, we get back to the main problem here being that from Kasumi's side, just look at that damage. It's sad, kind of. Even with better confirms or stronger understanding of Kasumi's combo theory, the outcome usually doesn't change that much, because in order to do those combos and not have them drop midway, you end up putting yourself in positions where you are more predictable again. And once Ayane has control of a situation and can push you out, you should just assume that she has control from there. That's one of the main times you actually want to immediately go to defense with Kasumi, because Ayane can't get in that fast. It reverses the situation so that now you're the one worried about being able to see. For the sake of demonstration, therefore, I'll switch to playing Kasumi for now. The same thing is going to happen, almost certainly. But I also have enough ways to be erratic that it matters. The difference is that to be erratic enough to avoid a lot of Ayane's defense systems, you have to spend 90% of your time not trying to hit her in the first place. And I find that a little difficult sometimes, but I think I can manage at least enough to give the demo of it. This comes up in a lot of other games as well, and I expect it's going to be really important in some of the newer fighting games coming out. Tekken has always been at least partially about this, and some stuff we're seeing from Street Fighter 6 is a relatively strong indication we're going to see a lot of the same. Particularly because of how the drive counters, drive cancel, turbo, whatever else. All these options for pushing on your opponent at the cost of meter allow you to be more erratic when you have enough meter to do it, which is a good way of balancing a lot of things. Your opponent knows you can only be erratic because you have enough meter to be erratic. When you run out of it, I don't have to worry about that for now. Here though, we don't have that option, so I just have to be erratic outright. But again, note what I said before. A lot of this is about not really thinking that you will or can hit Ayane at all. Right there, for example, I had the thought, okay, I can probably do 3K, and then realized, no, that would be committing. That would be giving my opponent an idea of what was coming next. So for me, this is simply every time I have an idea of, okay, it's time, I can do this move, my response is to not hit the button. This is something we train in a lot of other games as well. And it's really important a lot of the time to just go, I could do this. And then empty your mind, don't press the button you have in mind. And then see what's left once you've chosen explicitly to not press that button. That, for example, was a moment where I should have done exactly that and not hit the punch. That was similarly wrong, because I saw an opportunity and went for it, but my opponent knows what's coming, because if I keep on doing the thing that's relatively obvious for the flow, then obviously an opponent with this level of skill at predicting that will beat me up. This opens you up to a lot of Ayane's actual offense though. Still, what happens once the match changes enough is that you can do more of those things that are just normal and expected, simply because the opponent has to think about whether or not you are in fact going to do the obvious thing when the chance arrives. It's a mental state at that point. Can you get yourself to the point of, okay, some of the time I'll do what comes to mind and some of the time I won't. Blanked once. Didn't blank there, but I think that was more so just me not needing to. Blank here. Attack here. Attack again. Blank. But there's the offense. And at least at that point, it's the offense that ended the match. My opponent probably had to get into the similar state of thinking about, wait, if she blanks here, then me going for defense will lose, so I should attack. That was probably a good place to end that given everything else we've been flowing on, but I guess we can have one more match. Assuming this isn't super laggy or something. This is therefore our last on-stream match of the night. I have no idea how much longer this lounge is staying open because people might get kind of into it and there are quite a lot more people in here than usual. You can continue to count on us to have DOA just around to play on a Saturday. The game may not be super popular, but it can be as popular as we want it to be for like an hour on a Saturday night. This is probably a harder match. Not from the perspective of understanding what to do, but just mechanically, this match is harder on both sides. Hitomi covers a lot more space in front of her, and Ayane therefore must play a very strong zoning game a lot of the time, and often doesn't want to go forward too much if she has even the chance of mistiming it, as Hitomi really can just punch you and solve the problem. And once she starts punching, there's nothing specific stopping her from punching. On the other hand, making sure that you get the hold from Hitomi's side is much harder. Borderline impossible, I would say. Because Ayane by nature can't be that predictable. She's built as a character who can flow back there and then become invisible enough that you can't just destroy whatever it is she has planned. Depending on your character, you may have some really good options though. And similarly, moving yourself, here you can similarly be erratic and go, well, at least maybe I can make you miss. And if I can't make you miss, then it's probably time to hit punches. That's the easiest way to think through that. It can reduce it to the simple point. Should I be punching you or being erratic? That was not a hold I expected to manage, but this player is extremely good at holds, having practiced them for so long. Not quite enough for explosion to end the stream, but it looks like they're done with that. I have no idea if it was laggy or what, but it usually isn't. You can check out our Twitter @2_MK_FGC for any information on what exactly we're streaming tomorrow, as we have shifted our content from Do Not Falter as a guaranteed thing to a Sunday with everything. So we don't know exactly what we are streaming. It depends on literally the mood of people and any requests that we somehow get through any channels that we can be contacted. One of those channels being our website 2-mk.org, which is mostly about bots for various games to help you practice, but can be used to contact us in various ways without having to worry that you won't be seen or know exactly who to pinpoint. But that brings us to the end of stream for the night, and if you do want to join in, there's plenty of space and you can jump in anytime with the second match open for those who don't want to fight us. This has been Rillian, 14-2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.